I don't think nature is giving us much choice. We must move faster in our own interest. Pressure in India is, at the moment at least, coming really from government regulation. India is, in many ways, a victim of diverse kinds of ESG issues, all of which need strong action, urgent action.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainability Karma. I'm your host, Rajiv Tikoo. Today we talk about how ESG has become a movement, the challenges businesses are facing in adopting it, and the way forward. In this episode of Sustainability Karma, we have with us Dr Mukund Rajan. He is chairman and founder, ECube Investment Advisors. He has also co-authored a book titled Outlast: How ESG Can Benefit Your Business. Let's welcome Dr Mukund Rajan to this episode of Sustainability Karma.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Your book on ESG was the first in India on ESG, probably. So if you were to update it today, what would it be like?
So I think the good news, as far as I'm concerned, is that many of the issues that were outlined in the book, I think, continue to be as relevant today as they were 3 years back. I think if one had to update it, though, one interesting development in the last 3 years has been a fair amount of new regulation that has come in from the Securities and Exchange Board of India, for instance, on the business responsibility and sustainability reporting frameworks, and requirement, in fact, from next year for elements of the BRSR, the core BRSR, to in fact go through processes potentially of reasonable assurance. So some of those regulatory developments, I think, would be important to reflect upon, and the speed with which they are forcing change in corporate behavior. The second aspect, apart from this kind of data updation and updation of the regulatory environment, I think would be to reflect on some of the anti-ESG sentiment that has developed in some parts of the world, notably in North America and the United States currently, and to talk about what is driving some of that anti-ESG sentiment. One would probably want to maybe talk a bit more about later. And then the question that a lot of people asked after the book was, this is great, we want to do this, we need access to sustainable finance. And so perhaps some reflections on how quickly the world of sustainable banking, sustainable finance, all that is evolving to meet the requirement of companies that are embracing an ESG agenda. So I think broadly, those would be three aspects that one would probably want to refresh or update in the book.
Those would be, multiple books, not just one book updated, actually.
Possibly.
Things are changing very fast, actually. I don't know whether you anticipated it then that they would change so fast, actually. But they have been changing quite fast.
In a way, one was hoping that would happen because, you see, there are so many deadlines that are looming large. Not the least of which are some of India's own commitments on the international stage in terms of nationally determined commitments under the climate treaty by 2030. But I think what we are feeling this year in particular around issues like climate change, I don't think nature is giving us much choice. We must move faster in our own interest.
But the perception generally in India is that it's still a tick box kind of a thing for most corporates, and they don't still really appreciate the business case for it. What is your understanding?
My sense is that it is a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. It probably continues to be a mixed bag. The good news is that at least the seriousness with which companies take the sustainability and ESG agenda, it seems to be increasing, particularly amongst perhaps the better organized and larger companies. So to give you a data point this is from a couple of years back, actually, MSCI, which does a lot of the sustainability and ESG ratings on companies in India, came out with a statistic which suggested from over a 5-year period, from less than perhaps 1 in 5 companies to greater than 1 in 4 companies were now being rated almost in the top bracket of the ratings, an A rating, which would suggest that companies are taking this issue more seriously. I think more companies definitely are recognizing that both from a risk management perspective and in terms of opportunity identification, they need to embrace a sustainability or ESG strategy. But that said, in India, many things sort of move slowly until the government comes down quite hard with strict regulations and penalties. So there does tend to be also perhaps a tick the box approach, which is really looking at the compliance aspects rather than trying to see how this agenda can actually help companies perform better. But I think the good news is more companies are emerging which are seeing the value of taking this agenda seriously.
ESG is driven mostly by investors globally. How true is it of India?
So global investors, I mean, by definition, people who invest across markets. So the same people are driving the agenda in places like the European Union or Canada are the same ones who are also asking for better performance in ESG, even in the Indian context. But if you look at Indian investors, I think it's still early days. If you look at the total assets under management of all the Indian ESG mutual funds put together, for instance, it is still hovering at just around or below $2 billion, which is a tiny fraction of the entire mutual fund market. So I think a lot more of the pressure in India is, at the moment at least, coming really from government regulation, regulatory pressure, and some of the demands which increasingly people in civil society are making. Think about, for instance, the clean air issue in the National Capital Region. I think it is common people are sending their kids to school who are worried about the quality of life, who are worried about the conditions in which their kids are breathing air, who are raising these issues and asking for change. Investors in India, I think still early days, but hopefully it will evolve. The good news is that now, unlike, let's say, even 3 or 4 years back, there is much more data that is now becoming available to analyze the performance of companies and businesses. And I think many more investors will start taking note of that information and act on the basis of that to make stock selections. So I think early days still for Indian investors, but coming soon.
There's mounting criticism of ESG, particularly in the US. So how is it going to play out in India?
I hope, and I do feel fairly sure that in India, it is unlikely to be a subject that comes under too much controversy. For the simple reason that India is in many ways a victim of diverse kinds of ESG issues, all of which need strong action, urgent action. We've seen some of the hottest summers in India in the last few years. People are demanding action on that. We've seen the problems created by poor air quality in the National Capital Region. People are demanding action on that. I think around social issues, such as affirmative action for weaker sections of society, members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, India has had reservation for many decades. So I think these are all important issues that contribute towards stakeholder inclusion, a more inclusive growth going forward. And I think those are not going away anytime soon. All of those feed into what we conventionally understand as ESG. And I think, therefore, India, given its values, given its culture, given the context in which we have been evolving as even today a developing country that needs to carry all stakeholders together, I think the ESG agenda will not be one which will become particularly controversial, unlike what you're currently witnessing in a much richer country like the United States.
When ECube was set up, so were you ahead of time or were right in time, or when you look back?
I'd like to think that we've been pioneers because we were entering the market at exactly the time that I think a lot of these issues are beginning to be taken much more seriously. There was obviously some tailwinds also that we had. In India, for instance, the focus on good corporate governance, the focus on corporate social responsibility, the outline of the national guidelines on responsible business conduct, and now increasingly the concerns around specific issues such as global warming and climate change. So I think our timing has been good. But as you were reflecting on the question of investments that take place in the Indian market and investor sentiment domestically, I think there is still a fair amount of activity that is required before India gets elevated to the stature of a country that is taking ESG very seriously. So hopefully we are in the right place at the right time with an ability to contribute and support business interests going forward.
So how are you contributing to creating a more enabling environment for ESG adoption?
We do multiple things at ECube. As the name suggests, is drawn from 3 E's: engage and empower for ESG. So a lot of focus on providing advisory services to businesses that need help. We also have a capacity building initiative. We are actually knowledge partners to the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, FICCI, for their new Center for Sustainability Leadership. Later this year, we'll be launching several funds, including a private equity fund focused on supporting companies that need growth capital to undertake the climate transition. Last but not the least, we are developing plans for a sustainability media platform because we believe communication, connecting the dots for multiple stakeholder constituencies, everyone from senior corporate professionals to young children in school, needs to be engaged and alive to both the challenges and opportunities that this agenda presents. And I think the work that you're doing, for instance, with these podcasts is very reflective of that need for better communication. So hopefully we make our contribution in supporting the environment's requirement for all of these services.
Now, everybody's eyes are focused on upcoming budget, Union budget. So what is it that you would like it to contain, which could help in acceleration of ESG adoption, actually?
I think the budget, conventionally people have huge expectations. The belief tends to be that government has unlimited pools of capital. So everyone wants some budgetary support for some or the other initiative. But if I had to just allude to a few areas where I think the finance minister could certainly support the evolving ESG and sustainability agenda in India, they would include the following. One, I think the government obviously has to take very seriously the commitments it has already made on the global stage to address climate change and global warming. And I think, therefore, whatever support industry needs to expedite the achievement of India's targets, 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030 as a case in point, that support needs to be provided. Some of it would therefore have to be also directed to the public sector enterprises that also need to play their part. I think there are a number of government schemes that are already addressing aspects of sustainability and ESG. Think about the production-linked incentives, for instance, which are already being offered in spaces like the solar power industry, the solar panel production, or the electric vehicle industry for battery technology. Even the FAME scheme for faster adoption and manufacturing of electric and hybrid vehicles, the plan of the National Highways Authority every 40 to 60 kilometers to place electric vehicle charging points. All of this kind of infrastructure or innovation or research and development needs support and funding. Beyond that, I think some of the new policies that have been hinted at from time to time around, for instance, moving the fleet in transportation towards full electrification of the railways, all of those will also require budgetary support. I think on the policy side as well, there are going to be a number of things that government should think of doing. For instance, the central bank, the RBI, has this concept of priority sector lending. I think going forward, green financing will have to be a big part of priority sector lending. Closely associated with that is the need in India for a green taxonomy, for everyone to have a common language around what is green and what is not green. Again, linked to that, to give that whole agenda more support, government itself is a very big procurer of products and services in India. So can there be a very clear articulation of much more movement towards green procurement with the government and the products and service it procures itself? So I think combination of all of these kinds of initiatives, doing what you're already doing, but doing it faster, putting more capital behind important initiatives, being quite specific and articulating clear policies, all of that could be some of the interventions that the finance ministry takes going forward. One constituency in business in particular that I think has expressed concerns in the past is the small and medium enterprises fraternity. And I think trying to align many of the existing schemes to the needs of the SMEs, who all said and done are a big part of the job creation potential in India. Many of them contribute quite substantially in the value chains of larger enterprises. I think they will need much more support going forward.
So that's quite a bit. So thanks a lot, Dr. Rajan, for sparing time. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All the very best. Cheers. Thank you.
We hope you like this program. This program is also live streamed on All India Radio and aired on community radio stations. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 9818120554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainability.karma@gmail.com. You may also connect with us on social media. This podcast is also available on podcast hosting sites. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma, a podcast series with senior journalist and editor Rajiv Tikoo on sustainable development, sustainability and ESG.